The high desert of eastern Oregon has always been a place where silence holds secrets. Vast, empty, and unforgiving, the landscape stretches for miles without interruption, broken only by sagebrush, juniper trees, and the occasional abandoned homestead rotting into the earth. It is a place where people disappear, not because they want to, but because the land swallows them whole and never gives them back. And in the summer of 1992, two women drove into that emptiness and never came out. Their names were Rebecca Tanner and her daughter, Nicole. Rebecca was 37 years old, a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner in Boise, Idaho, saving every dollar she could. Nicole was 14, bright-eyed, with a camera always hanging around her neck. She loved photography, capturing moments that most people overlooked, the way light filtered through kitchen windows, the expression on her mother's face when she laughed, the world as she saw it. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives, until the day they were not. On July 18, 1992, Rebecca and Nicole packed their 1986 Ford Escort with camping gear, snacks, and a road map. They were heading west on Highway 20, planning to visit Crater Lake National Park. It was supposed to be a bonding trip, a rare escape from the grind of everyday survival. Rebecca had promised Nicole they would see the deepest blue water in the country, that they would hike the trails and forget about bills and broken washing machines and the weight of being alone in the world. They left Boise early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen. Rebecca's neighbor, a woman named Gretchen Holmes, saw them loading the car. She waved from her porch, watching as the Escort pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. Gretchen later told investigators that Rebecca seemed happy that morning, lighter than she had been in months. Nicole was singing along to the radio, her voice carrying through the open window. That was the last time anyone who knew them saw Rebecca and Nicole Tanner alive. By the evening of July 19th, they should have arrived at Crater Lake. They had reservations at a campground, a small spot near the rim where families gathered to roast marshmallows and tell ghost stories under the stars. But Rebecca and Nicole never checked in. Bull, the campground host, an older man named Walter Price, waited until nightfall before marking their site as a no-show. He thought nothing of it at the time. People changed their minds, took detours, broke down on the side of the road. It happened all the time. But when Rebecca failed to show up for her shift at the diner on July 21st, her manager, Tom Lipman, knew something was wrong. Rebecca never missed work. She couldn't afford to. Tom called Rebecca's apartment, let the phone ring 20 times, then called Gretchen. That was when the panic started to set in. Gretchen contacted the Boise Police Department that same afternoon. She explained that Rebecca and Nicole had left for a camping trip 3 days earlier and had not returned. The officer who took the report, a young patrolman named Keith Voss, asked the standard questions. Were they prone to running away? Had there been any recent arguments? Was there a boyfriend in the picture, someone who might have caused trouble? Gretchen answered no to everything. Rebecca was a good mother, a hard worker, and Nicole was a straight-A student who spent her free time taking pictures and reading library books. There was no drama, no red flags, no reason for them to vanish. Still, Keith Voss filed the report as a low-priority missing persons case. People went missing all the time, especially on road trips through rural areas. They would probably turn up in a few days with a story about car trouble or a spontaneous detour. The system was not designed to respond quickly to cases like this, especially when the missing were poor, when they had no political connections, and when they were just another single mother and her kid trying to survive. But days turned into weeks, and Rebecca and Nicole did not come home. On August 2, 1992, a highway maintenance crew working along a remote stretch of Highway 20, about 60 miles southeast of Bend, Oregon, found something that made them stop. Parked on the shoulder of the road, half hidden by overgrown brush, was a blue 1986 Ford Escort. The license plate matched the vehicle Rebecca Tanner had been driving. The car was empty. When Oregon State Police arrived on the scene, they found the doors unlocked, the keys still in the ignition. Rebecca's purse was on the front seat, her wallet inside, untouched. $43 in cash, her driver's license, a photo of Nicole tucked behind a credit card. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no blood, no damage to the vehicle. The gas tank was a quarter full. The engine started without issue. In the back seat, investigators found Nicole's camera, a cheap disposable model she had been using to document the trip. The film had been partially used, 12 exposures out of 24. They also found a cooler with melted ice, sandwiches wrapped in plastic that had gone bad in the heat, and a road atlas folded open to a map of Central Oregon. There was no note, no explanation, no clue as to where Rebecca and Nicole had gone, or why they had left their car behind. The area where the escort was found was desolate. Highway 20 cut through miles of high desert, with few towns and even fewer services. The nearest gas station was 30 miles away. The nearest motel was even farther. It was not the kind of place where people stopped unless they had to. And if Rebecca and Nicole had experienced car trouble, why had they left the vehicle with the keys inside? Why had they not flagged down help? Search teams combed the surrounding area for days. Volunteers, police officers, and search and rescue dogs scoured the sagebrush and rocky terrain, looking for any sign of the missing women. They found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no evidence that Rebecca and Nicole had ever left the car. It was as if they had simply evaporated into the summer heat. The investigation stalled almost immediately. Without a body, without a suspect, without any evidence of foul play, there was little for law enforcement to pursue. The case was transferred to the Oregon State Police Major Crimes Unit, where it sat in a filing cabinet alongside dozens of other unsolved disappearances. Detectives interviewed Gretchen Holmes, Tom Lipman, and anyone else who had known Rebecca and Nicole, but no one could provide answers. Rebecca had no enemies, no debts, no reason to run. Nicole was a child who loved her mother and had everything to live for. As the months passed, the case grew cold. The local newspapers ran stories about the missing mother and daughter, but public interest faded quickly. By 1993, Rebecca and Nicole Tanner were just another tragic footnote, another pair of names added to the list of people who had vanished without a trace. But the story did not end there. In the years that followed, strange reports began to surface. Travelers passing through that stretch of Highway 20 claimed to have seen things they could not explain, and a woman and a girl standing on the side of the road, waving for help, only to disappear when drivers slowed down. A blue car parked on the shoulder, exactly where the escort had been found, though police had towed the vehicle years earlier. Some said they heard voices carried on the wind, a young girl's laughter echoing through the desert at dusk. Most people dismissed these stories as folklore, the kind of ghost tales that spring up around unsolved tragedies. But there were enough reports that local law enforcement took note. In 1998, a state trooper named Daniel Cross responded to a call about an abandoned vehicle on Highway 20. When he arrived, he found nothing. But he filed a report anyway, noting that the location matched the exact spot where Rebecca Tanner's car had been discovered 6 years earlier. Then, in 2003, something happened that reignited interest in the case. A hiker named Lucas Brennan was exploring a remote area about 15 miles south of where the escort had been found. He was off-trail, deep in the desert, searching for geodes in the volcanic rock formations that dotted the landscape. As he climbed over a ridge, he noticed something unusual, a small clearing surrounded by juniper trees, with a ring of stones arranged in a deliberate circle. In the center of the circle was a backpack. Lucas approached cautiously. The backpack was faded, sun-bleached, and covered in dust, but it was intact. He opened it carefully, unsure of what he would find. Its inside were a few items: a water bottle, a flashlight with dead batteries, a folded map of Oregon, and a small notebook with a pink cover. The notebook belonged to Nicole Tanner. Lucas immediately contacted the authorities. Within hours, a team of investigators descended on the site. They photographed the stone circle, searched the surrounding area, and carefully documented every item in the backpack. The notebook was sent to a forensic lab for analysis. When the results came back, they were chilling. The notebook contained entries written in Nicole's handwriting. The first few pages were typical teenage observations, notes about the trip, sketches of trees and animals, a list of things she wanted to photograph. But the later entries were different. They were frantic, disjointed, filled with fear. One entry, dated July 19th, 1992, read, "Mom says we need to keep moving. Something is following us." Another, dated July 20th, "We left the car. We had to. It was watching us from the rocks. Mom won't tell me what it is, but I can see it too." The final entry, dated July 21st, was almost illegible. "We can't find the road. We have been walking for hours. The sun is setting. I don't think we are going to make it." The notebook ended there, and investigators were baffled. If Rebecca and Nicole had fled from something, why had they not reported it to the police? Why had they abandoned their car and ventured into the desert on foot? And what had they been running from? The discovery of the notebook prompted a renewed search effort. Cadaver dogs were brought in, helicopters scanned the area, and volunteers combed every inch of the desert for miles around the stone circle. But once again they found nothing. No remains, no clothing, no further evidence of what had happened to Rebecca and Nicole. The stone circle itself became a point of intense scrutiny. Experts examined the formation and determined that it had been constructed deliberately, but they could not agree on its purpose. Some believed it was a makeshift shelter, a place where Rebecca and Nicole had tried to rest. Others thought it might have been a marker, a signal to potential rescuers. A few investigators, however, had a darker theory. They believed the stone circle was not built by Rebecca and Nicole at all. This theory gained traction when a retired anthropologist named Dr. Ellen Vasquez examined photographs of the site. Dr. Vasquez specialized in indigenous cultures of the Pacific Northwest and had spent decades studying ancient ceremonial sites. She noted that the arrangement of the stones bore a resemblance to markers used by certain tribes to designate sacred or forbidden areas. But she also pointed out that the circle appeared too recent to be genuinely ancient. Someone had built it, and recently. The question was, who? In 2007, the case took another disturbing turn. A man named Harold Pitts, a long-haul trucker who frequently drove Highway 20, came forward with information he had kept secret for years. Harold claimed that on the night of July 19th, 1992, he had seen something strange while driving through the area where Rebecca's car was later found. He described seeing a woman and a young girl standing on the side of the road, illuminated by his headlights. The woman was waving frantically, as if trying to flag him down. But something about the scene unnerved Harold. He could not explain it, but he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Instead of stopping, he accelerated and drove past them. Harold said he looked in his rearview mirror and saw the woman and girl still standing there, watching as his truck disappeared into the night. He never reported the incident because he felt ashamed. He had ignored someone in need, and he had carried that guilt for 15 years. When investigators pressed Harold for details, he described the woman as wearing a light-colored shirt and jeans, which matched Rebecca's clothing. The girl had dark hair and was holding something in her hands, possibly a camera, and the description matched Nicole. But Harold also said something else, something that made the investigators pause. He said that as he drove away, he glanced in his side mirror one last time. And in that brief moment he saw a third figure standing behind the woman and the girl, the tall, shadowy shape that had not been there before. Harold could not describe it in detail. He said it was dark, indistinct, almost like a trick of the light. But he swore it had been there, watching. The investigators did not know what to make of Harold's testimony. Was he telling the truth, or had 15 years of guilt distorted his memory? Had he really seen Rebecca and Nicole that night, or was it someone else entirely? And if he had seen them, why had they not flagged down another driver? Why had they disappeared into the desert, instead of staying on the road where help could find them? These questions haunted the case for years. By 2010, the investigation had once again gone dormant. The FBI had been consulted multiple times, but without new evidence there was little they could do. Rebecca and Nicole Tanner remained missing, their fate unknown, their story unfinished. But in 2025, something changed. A team of amateur investigators, part of a growing online community dedicated to solving cold cases, began digging into the Tanner disappearance. They called themselves the Cold Trail Collective, and they had a reputation for finding overlooked details in forgotten cases. And they pored over police reports, interviewed witnesses, and used modern technology to re-examine old evidence. One member of the group, a woman named Paige Duvall, became obsessed with the case. Paige was a former journalist who had left her career to focus on true crime research. She spent months analyzing every detail of the Tanner case, cross-referencing timelines, mapping locations, and searching for patterns. And then Paige found something that no one else had noticed. She discovered that between 1987 and 1995, at least 7 other people had vanished along the same stretch of Highway 20 where Rebecca and Nicole disappeared. Most of the cases had been written off as unrelated, attributed to accidents, voluntary departures, or simple bad luck. But Paige saw a connection. All of the victims had been traveling alone or in pairs. All of them had been last seen near the same 60-mile stretch of highway. And in several cases, their vehicles had been found abandoned, with no signs of struggle, just like Rebecca's escort. And Paige compiled her findings into a detailed report and submitted it to the FBI. At first, she received no response. But then, in early 2025, something happened that no one could have predicted. A hiker named Travis Montgomery was exploring a canyon system about 40 miles from where Nicole's backpack had been found. Travis was an experienced outdoorsman, someone who knew the high desert well. He was searching for fossils when he stumbled upon something that stopped him cold. Hidden beneath an overhang, concealed by years of erosion and fallen rock, was a small cave. Inside the cave, Travis found bones. Not human bones. Weren't human bones. Travis immediately contacted authorities. Within days, a forensic team arrived at the site. They carefully excavated the remains, which included 2 partial skeletons, 1 adult and 1 adolescent. Along with the bones, they found fragments of clothing, a woman's wristwatch, and a small metal object that had been buried in the dirt. It was a heart-shaped locket. Inside the locket was a photograph of a young girl with dark hair, smiling at the camera. The photograph was of Nicole Tanner. DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Rebecca and Nicole Tanner. After 33 years, they had finally been found. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had they ended up in that cave? Had they fled there seeking shelter, or had someone brought them there? And why had their remains been concealed so carefully, as if someone had deliberately hidden them from the world? The forensic examination revealed even more disturbing details. Both skeletons showed signs of trauma. Rebecca's skull had been fractured, likely from a blunt force impact. Nicole's ribs had been broken. The injuries suggested violence, but the exact cause of death could not be determined after so many years. Near the remains, investigators found something else. Scratched into the cave wall, barely visible beneath decades of dust, were words carved with a sharp object. They read, "He made us run." The words carved into the cave wall changed everything. He made us run. 4 words that transformed the disappearance of Rebecca and Nicole Tanner from a tragic mystery into something far more sinister. The message was analyzed by forensic linguists, handwriting experts, and criminal psychologists. The consensus was unanimous. The writing matched Nicole's hand. She had carved those words into the stone, likely with a piece of metal or a sharp rock, in the final hours of her life. But who was he? And why had Rebecca and Nicole been running? The FBI officially reopened the case in March of 2025, assigning it to Special Agent Carolyn Mitchell, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience in violent crimes and abductions. Carolyn had seen the worst that humanity had to offer, but something about the Tanner case unsettled her in a way few others had. The cave where the bodies were found was remote, nearly inaccessible without specialized knowledge of the terrain. Someone had known exactly where to take Rebecca and Nicole, and how to ensure they would never be found. Carolyn began by re-interviewing everyone connected to the original investigation. Harold Pitts, the trucker who claimed to have seen the women on the night of July 19, 1992, was located in Nevada. Now 71 years old and battling emphysema. When Carolyn sat down with him in his small apartment, Harold broke down in tears. He had carried the guilt of driving past those women for over 3 decades, and now that they had been found dead, that guilt threatened to consume him entirely. Carolyn pressed him for details he might have forgotten or dismissed. Harold closed his eyes, forcing himself back to that night in 1992. He remembered the woman's desperate wave, the girl clutching something to her chest, and that third figure, the shadowy shape that had appeared behind them. When Carolyn asked him to describe it more carefully, Harold struggled. It had been tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, but its proportions had seemed wrong, somehow distorted. He could not see a face, could not make out clothing or features. It had simply been there, and then his truck had carried him past, and he had never looked back. But there was something else Harold remembered, something he had not mentioned in his 2007 interview. As he had driven away that night, his CB radio had crackled with static, and then for just a moment he had heard what sounded like a voice. Not words exactly, but a low, rhythmic sound that made his skin crawl. He had turned off the radio and driven through the night without stopping, desperate to put distance between himself and whatever he had witnessed. Carolyn made a note of this detail and moved on to the next witness. Paige Duvall, the amateur investigator who had uncovered the pattern of disappearances along Highway 20, had compiled an extensive database of information. When Carolyn examined Paige's research, she found something that law enforcement had missed for years. Between 1987 and 1995, 9 people had vanished along that stretch of highway, not 7. 2 additional cases had been classified differently, filed under different jurisdictions, and therefore overlooked in the original analysis. When Carolyn mapped out all 9 disappearances, a clear pattern emerged. Every victim had vanished during the summer months, between June and August. Every disappearance had occurred during evening hours, between sunset and midnight. And in 6 of the 9 cases, witnesses reported seeing the victims on or near the highway shortly before they vanished, often appearing distressed or confused. But what struck Carolyn most was something else entirely. In 4 of the cases, witnesses described seeing an unusual vehicle in the area around the time of the disappearances. The descriptions were vague and inconsistent, as memories often are, but there were commonalities. A large truck or van, dark in color, possibly with some kind of marking or logo on the side. Several witnesses mentioned that the vehicle had driven slowly, as if the driver was searching for something. Carolyn requested access to every traffic citation, accident report, and police log from that stretch of Highway 20 between 1987 and 1995. It took weeks to compile the data, but eventually a name emerged: Frank Ortega. Frank had been a resident of Burns, Oregon, a small town about 80 miles from where Rebecca's car was found. In 1989, he had been stopped by Oregon State Police for a broken taillight while driving a dark blue Chevy van on Highway 20. The officer who had made the stop, a patrolman named Roger Finch, noted in his report that Frank had been nervous and evasive during the interaction. Roger had run Frank's license and found nothing unusual, so he issued a warning and sent him on his way. But Roger remembered the encounter years later when he heard about the Tanner disappearance. He mentioned it to a fellow officer, but without any concrete evidence linking Frank to the crime, the lead went nowhere. Frank Ortega became just another name in a file, forgotten as the investigation stalled. Now in 2025, Carolyn Mitchell was determined to find out who Frank Ortega was and what he might know about the missing women. The search for Frank Ortega proved more difficult than anticipated. He had left Burns in 1996, and after that his trail went cold. Carolyn worked with FBI analysts to track his movements, following a scattered path of address changes, short-term jobs, and sporadic encounters with law enforcement. Frank had worked as a ranch hand, a warehouse loader, and a night security guard at various points in his life. He seemed to drift from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to establish roots. But in 2001, Frank had been arrested in Idaho Falls for trespassing on private property. He had been found sleeping in his van behind a closed gas station. The arresting officer noted that Frank appeared disheveled and paranoid, claiming that people were watching him, following him. He was released after paying a fine and warned not to return to the area. After 2001, Frank Ortega disappeared from official records entirely. No employment history, no address changes, no interaction with law enforcement. It was as if he had ceased to exist. Carolyn expanded the search, checking hospitals, homeless shelters, and morgues across the Pacific Northwest. In April of 2025, she finally got a hit. A man matching Frank Ortega's description had been admitted to a psychiatric facility in Spokane, Washington, in 2008, but after being found wandering naked through a residential neighborhood, screaming incoherently. He had been committed under a John Doe designation because he refused to provide his name or any identifying information. The facility still had him in custody 17 years later. Carolyn traveled to Spokane with another agent, a man named Keith Ramos, who specialized in interviewing individuals with severe mental illness. They arrived at the facility on a gray, drizzly morning in late April. The head psychiatrist, Dr. Andrew Lang, met them in the lobby and briefed them on the patient's condition. The man they knew as John Doe had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and severe PTSD. He rarely spoke, spent most of his time staring at walls, and had violent episodes triggered by seemingly random stimuli. Dr. Lang warned them that getting coherent information from him would be nearly impossible, but Carolyn insisted on trying. They were led down a long corridor to a secured wing of the facility. Inside a small, sterile room with padded walls, a man sat hunched on a bed, rocking back and forth. He was gaunt, his hair gray and matted, his eyes sunken and distant. When Carolyn entered the room, he did not look up. She approached slowly, speaking in a calm, measured tone. She introduced herself, explained why she was there, and asked if his name was Frank Ortega. For a long moment there was no response. Then, slowly, the man raised his head and looked at her. His eyes were hollow, empty of recognition or understanding. But when Carolyn mentioned Highway 20, mentioned the summer of 1992, something shifted. A flicker of emotion crossed his face, so brief she almost missed it. Fear. They are a year. Carolyn pressed gently, asking if he remembered driving a blue van, if he remembered seeing a woman and a girl on the side of the road. The man began to shake his head, not in denial, but in a frantic, rhythmic motion. His lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Keith leaned in closer, listening. The man was whispering the same phrase over and over, "Not me." Not me, it was him. Carolyn felt a chill run down her spine. She asked who him was, but the man only continued shaking his head, his whispers growing more agitated. "He comes at night. He takes them. He made me watch." Dr. Lang stepped in, concerned that the patient was becoming too distressed. But before they could leave, the man grabbed Carolyn's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time there was clarity in his gaze. "I tried to help them," he said, his voice hoarse but coherent. "But he wouldn't let me. He never lets anyone help." Then the clarity vanished, and the man collapsed back onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Lang ushered Carolyn and Keith out of the room, ending the interview. Outside the facility, Carolyn stood in the parking lot, trying to process what she had just heard. If the man inside was Frank Ortega, and if his fragmented statements held any truth, then he had witnessed something connected to the Tanner disappearance. But his condition made it impossible to extract reliable testimony. Everything he said could be dismissed as the delusions of a severely ill mind, unless there was corroborating evidence. Carolyn returned to the FBI field office in Portland and assembled a task force. They began combing through every piece of evidence connected to the 9 disappearances along Highway 20. They re-examined witness statements, reviewed old photographs, and searched for any detail that might have been overlooked. It was during this process that an analyst named Jordan Mills found something extraordinary. Jordan had been digitizing old police reports when he noticed an unusual notation in the file for one of the other victims, a man named Peter Caldwell who had vanished in 1990. Peter had been driving from Boise to Bend when his truck was found abandoned near the same area where Rebecca's car would later be discovered. In the original investigation, a witness had reported seeing a strange marking near where Peter's truck was parked. The witness, a local rancher named Gil Hobson, had described it as a symbol or drawing scratched into a wooden fence post. He had mentioned it to police, but they had dismissed it as graffiti, unrelated to the case. Jordan tracked down the original police photos from the scene. Most were grainy and poorly lit, taken with a standard film camera in 1990. But one image, captured almost by accident, showed the fence post Gil had described. Zoomed in and enhanced with modern software, the marking became visible. It was the same symbol that had been found scratched into the dirt near the stone circle where Nicole's backpack had been discovered. The symbol consisted of 3 intersecting lines forming a triangular shape, with a circle at the center. It meant nothing to the investigators at first, but Carolyn sent the image to Dr. Ellen Vasquez, the anthropologist who had examined the stone circle years earlier. Dr. Vasquez responded within hours. She had seen the symbol before, not in indigenous art, but in historical accounts of frontier settlements in the Pacific Northwest during the late 1800s. According to folklore, the symbol had been used as a warning marker, a way to designate areas where people had gone missing or where strange events had occurred. Settlers called them hunger marks, because they were often found in places where travelers had disappeared without a trace, as if the land itself had consumed them. But Dr. Vasquez also noted something troubling. The symbol had resurfaced in the 1970s and 1980s, carved into trees and rocks in remote areas across Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. Authorities at the time had attributed the markings to vandals or pranksters, but no one had ever been caught. The markings always appeared in isolated locations, far from roads or hiking trails, places where few people ventured. Carolyn felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align, but the picture they formed was incomplete and deeply unsettling. Someone had been using that symbol, marking locations connected to disappearances. But who? And why? The answer came from an unexpected source. In May of 2025, a retired park ranger named Dennis Fowler contacted the FBI after seeing news coverage of the Tanner case. Dennis had worked in the Ochoco National Forest during the 1980s and 1990s, patrolling remote trails and maintaining backcountry campsites. He told investigators that he had encountered the hunger mark symbol multiple times during his career, always in areas where hikers or campers had reported feeling watched or followed. Dennis had investigated several of these reports personally. In most cases, he found nothing unusual. But there was one incident that had stayed with him for decades. In August of 1991, a family camping in a remote area of the forest reported that their 12-year-old son had seen a man standing at the edge of their campsite in the middle of the night. The boy described the man as tall and silent, wearing dark clothing that seemed to blend into the shadows. The man had not approached, had not spoken. He had simply stood there, watching, until the boy screamed and his parents came running. By the time they reached him, the man was gone. Dennis had searched the area the next morning and found fresh tracks leading away from the campsite. The tracks were human, but the stride length was unusually long, as if the person had been running. Following the tracks, Dennis eventually came to a small clearing where he found the hunger mark symbol carved into a tree trunk. He had reported the incident, but his superiors dismissed it. There was no crime, no evidence of a threat. The family left the forest and never returned. Dennis told Carolyn that he had continued to see those symbols for years, always in places where people reported strange encounters. He believed someone had been living in the forest, watching travelers, marking locations for reasons he could not fathom. But without proof, without a suspect, there was nothing he could do. Now, with the discovery of Rebecca and Nicole's remains, Dennis wondered if the person he had been tracking for all those years was the same person who had killed them. Carolyn authorized a comprehensive search of the forest areas surrounding Highway 20. Teams of agents and volunteers spread out across hundreds of square miles, looking for additional hunger mark symbols, hidden campsites, or any evidence of a long-term human presence in the wilderness. What they found was staggering. Over the course of 3 weeks, searchers located more than 40 hunger mark symbols carved into trees, rocks, and fence posts across a vast territory. The symbols formed a rough pattern, clustered around areas where disappearances had been reported. Near several of the symbols, searchers found remnants of old campsites, fire rings, and makeshift shelters, evidence that someone had been living off the grid for years, but possibly decades. But the most chilling discovery came in early June. A search team exploring a canyon system about 50 miles from where Rebecca and Nicole's bodies had been found stumbled upon a hidden structure. It was partially underground, dug into the side of a hill and concealed by brush and fallen trees. Inside, they found a crude living space, a sleeping bag, canned food, tools, and a stack of old newspapers. They also found photographs, dozens of them, pinned to the walls or scattered on the ground. The photos showed people, travelers on highways, hikers on trails, families at campsites. Many of the images appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge, shot from a distance or through trees. Some of the faces were familiar, matching descriptions of people who had vanished along Highway 20. And among those photographs was one of Rebecca and Nicole Tanner, standing beside their blue Ford Escort, smiling at the camera. The FBI processed the site as a crime scene, collecting every piece of evidence. DNA analysis revealed traces of multiple individuals in the shelter, but the primary genetic profile belonged to an unknown male. Cross-referencing the DNA with national databases produced no matches. Whoever had been living in that shelter had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted, never entered the system. But the photographs told a story. Whoever this person was, he had been stalking people for years, watching them, documenting them, and in at least some cases making them disappear. Carolyn Mitchell stood in the shelter, surrounded by the haunting gallery of faces, and felt a cold certainty settle over her. The person responsible for the deaths of Rebecca and Nicole Tanner was still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. He had evaded capture for decades, moving through the landscape like a ghost, leaving only symbols and terror in his wake. The FBI issued a public alert, warning travelers to exercise caution in remote areas along Highway 20 and the surrounding forests. They released sketches based on witness descriptions, hoping someone would recognize the man. Tips poured in from across the country, but none led to a solid identification. As the summer of 2025 wore on, the investigation reached a frustrating impasse. The evidence was compelling, the pattern undeniable, but the perpetrator remained a shadow, always just out of reach. Then, on August 3, 2025, exactly 33 years and 15 days after Rebecca and Nicole Tanner disappeared, something happened that sent shockwaves through the investigation. A young couple, Emily and Jason Pruitt, were driving along Highway 20 late in the evening, heading home to Bend after visiting family in Boise. As they passed through the same desolate stretch where Rebecca's car had been found, their engine began to sputter. Jason pulled over to the shoulder, cursing their bad luck. As Emily waited in the car, Jason popped the hood and examined the engine with a flashlight. He was no mechanic, but he hoped it was something simple, a loose wire or empty fluid reservoir. While he worked, Emily scrolled through her phone, trying to get a signal to call for help. And that was when she saw him. A man standing at the edge of the road, about 50 feet away, partially illuminated by the glow of their headlights. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and he was not moving, just standing there watching them. Emily froze. Her first instinct was to call out to Jason, but fear strangled her voice. The man took a step forward, then another, moving with a slow, deliberate gait that made her skin crawl. She finally managed to shout Jason's name. He looked up from the engine, saw the figure approaching, and immediately slammed the hood shut. He jumped into the driver's seat, turned the key, and miraculously the engine roared to life. Jason floored the accelerator, and the car lurched back onto the highway, tires screeching. Emily looked back through the rear window and saw the man still standing in the road, unmoving, watching as they sped away into the night. The next morning, Emily reported the encounter to the Oregon State Police. Her description of the man matched the composite sketches released by the FBI. Within hours, Carolyn Mitchell had agents on the scene, searching the area where the Pruitts had broken down. They found fresh footprints leading off the highway and into the desert. Following the tracks, they came to a small clearing where someone had recently camped. The remains of a fire were still warm, and carved into a nearby rock was the hunger mark symbol. But the person was gone. As of today, October 3rd, 2025, the investigation remains active. The FBI continues to search for the man believed to be responsible for the deaths of Rebecca and Nicole Tanner, as well as the disappearances of at least 8 other people along Highway 20. His identity is unknown. His whereabouts are unknown. But the evidence suggests he is still out there, still watching, still waiting. Rebecca and Nicole Tanner were laid to rest in Boise in July of 2025, 33 years after they vanished. Gretchen Holmes, now 78 years old, attended the funeral. She stood beside the graves and wept for the women she had waved goodbye to on that summer morning so long ago, never imagining it would be the last time she saw them alive. The hunger mark symbols continue to appear in remote areas across the Pacific Northwest. Travelers report strange encounters, sightings of a tall man in dark clothing, the feeling of being watched in places where no one should be. Some dismiss these stories as paranoia, the product of fear and suggestion. Others believe the reports, and they avoid Highway 20 altogether. The cave where Rebecca and Nicole died has been sealed by authorities, but the words carved into the wall remain, a testament to their final moments of terror. He made us run. Aman. 4 words that will never be explained, never be fully understood. 4 words that haunt everyone who knows the story. Because somewhere in the high desert of eastern Oregon, in the vast and unforgiving wilderness where silence holds secrets, a man continues to walk. He leaves no name, no face, no trace except for symbols scratched into stone and the empty spaces where people used to be. He is still out there, watching. Which meant to, waiting, when some, making them run. Bang.